Okay, so we're going to be building just a really simple recipe website using React on the front end with a framework. I'm using Next.js here. You can use pretty much any React framework that you want. This is a pretty one-size-fits-all solution, so it's not really framework specific. Just a note on prerequisites here. I am expecting that you already feel comfortable working with React and with Craft. You don't have to be an expert in either of those technologies, but it's just going to be helpful for you to at least sort of know your way around both of those because we're not going to go over anything specific there in this tutorial. One other thing is just a note on the tech stack. I'm recording this in November of 2025. If you are watching this later than that, just bear in mind that the technology may have changed since then. I'm using Craft 5, I'm using Next.js 15. I'm using React 19, and we're also going to be using a library called Apollo Client, and that is version 4. So just check and make sure that those versions are similar to what you are using where you are. Otherwise, you may potentially run into compatibility problems. So we're going to be building this recipe website here. Really simple. It's got just our recipe listing, and then it's got a search field for filtering our recipes down. And then we've also got some filters for dietary restrictions that can, and these are categories within Craft that we can further filter our recipes down. And then we just have a detail page with the full recipe. We've got a list of ingredients here. This is just a standard UL list, and then another list of instructions here with an image. Before we start, just give you an idea of what our Craft structure is. We've got a single channel called recipes, and that has a single entry type called recipe. And then inside of that, we have our title field, we have an assets field for our image, we have categories for our dietary restrictions, a table field for ingredients, and then this is a CK editor field for our instructions. And then we've got our categories list right here. This is a category group called dietary restrictions. And that's basically it. So to get started in doing headless mode in Craft, the first thing we need to do is to enable headless mode in the config. So we're going to go into our Craft config file, and it's just config general. And we're going to add the headless mode flag. And that is headless mode true. And so what that's going to do is that's going to tell Craft to respond to requests using JSON rather than routing requests through the Twig template editor. So if someone accesses your backend data layer, it will prevent this from delivering any unnecessary HTML code or accidentally being indexed by search engines or things like that. And it'll also speed up its response times because Craft doesn't have to route through the template router. So it's going to be a little bit snappier on the responses for that. Okay, so that's all we really have to do on the code side. And then the next thing we have to do is set up our GraphQL schema. So a schema is sort of like a menu of items in your Craft installation that your API is able to access. So for schemas, you can have data that can be read or it can be changed or mutated. And so right now we're just doing a read-only site here. We're just going to be reading our recipes and displaying them. We're not going to actually be like editing our entries from our front end. So what we're going to do is we're just going to create a really simple schema here. We're going to click new schema. We're on so GraphQL sidebar schemas. New schema. And so I'm just going to call this recipes and filter categories. We're just going to kind of go down the list here, and this is where we choose what is going to be allowed to be queried and what is not allowed. So we do want to query from the site. We do not want to query any of our drafts or revisions or elements. We don't want our site to have any access to that, so we'll leave those empty. We want to query for our recipes, and we're also querying our CK editor fields because CK editor fields are actually considered entries within Craft. So we want to be able to query all of that because we're going to need our recipe instructions. Same thing with assets. We need our images, so we want to be able to access that volume that those images are stored in. And then we also need our dietary restrictions category group. And then we also have options down here for mutations. So again, this would be if we were wanting to make changes to our recipes from the front end. We maybe wanted our users to be able to edit the recipes or something like that. Or we could maybe have like something where the users create their own custom lists, and that would need to be stored somewhere. But we're not doing that for this tutorial. This is just a really simple getting started tutorial, so we don't want to do any kind of mutations. So that's all that we need right there, and we're just going to save. I'm just going to confirm my password to do that. Okay, so we've got our schema set up. We've decided what kind of data is allowed. And so now we're going to generate a token. So what's a token? If you have an experience using traditional REST APIs, you're probably used to working with endpoints. And so for a traditional REST endpoint, if you want to get recipes, it would be like located at the URL /recipes.json. And then there's a different endpoint for the categories. So it would be like /categories.json. But with GraphQL, you just have one single endpoint, and you use tokens to tell GraphQL specifically what schema you want to access. And so that's what we're going to do here, is we're going to create a token so that our front-end site will be able to access that schema. So we're going to create a token. Now, as far as the naming conventions of the token, you want to name your token after who or what is accessing the data. And so the reason is for that is that you can have a lot of different tokens for a lot of different reasons. Like you can have a token for site admins, and that gives you access to a much wider schema. So like admins can like edit recipes. And then you can also have a token for site users. And so they have a much more limited access to what they're able to use. And so the reason you would want to have different tokens is because if for some reason you have like a security breach or a DDoS or something like that, you can disable that token or delete that token and revoke access for a particular group without disrupting access for other groups of people using those tokens. So when we're naming this, we just want to name it after who or what is using the site. So in this case, it's our Next.js app. So we're just going to call it Next.js app. And so if at some later date I wanted to disable access or revoke access for the app to be able to access the schema, I can do that. And so we want it to be able to access the recipes and filter categories schema. And then it's going to create this authorization header that we're going to use when we set up our GraphQL query. So we're just going to save that. And that is it as far as the Craft side of things. We're just getting Craft ready to receive requests. So in the next tutorial, we will actually get started writing a GraphQL query and getting ready to actually query our data from our front end.